Hi everyone, Dr. Hall here. I'm going to talk to you about the blood vessels of the abdomen and pelvis. So first of all, as we look inside the abdominal cavity, we're going to see our abdominal aorta, which is the aorta as it comes down into the abdominal cavity after going through this opening in the diaphragm. Right away, we're going to see a little branching off of 3 blood vessels all together at the same time. So we call this region the celiac trunk. So we see the celiac trunk is the first major branch off of the abdominal aorta. The celiac trunk branches into 3 separate arteries. The splenic artery, which is going to travel out to the left to the spleen, the common hepatic artery, which is going to travel to the right toward the liver, and the left gastric artery, which is also going to travel toward the left toward the stomach. Again, on this side, we can see the splenic artery, which is going to go out to the spleen, common hepatic artery, and left gastric artery is the most superior and smallest of the 3, which will come out to the stomach. So, celiac trunk is our first branch off the abdominal aorta. Next, coming inferiorly, we have the superior mesenteric artery. We can see it here and here. It's a pretty big artery. It's going to supply all of the small intestine as well as about half of the large intestine. The superior mesenteric artery peaks out just above these arteries heading out to the 2 kidneys. So these are the renal arteries that you see going to the kidneys on each side. As we continue down with the abdominal aorta, we see 2 small blood vessels that come out to the sides there and here. Those are going to travel down into the pelvis or into the scrotum, depending on the biologic sex of the person. And those are going to be called the gonadal arteries. If we know the sex of the person, we might call them ovarian arteries or testicular arteries. But if we don't know, we're just going to call them gonadal arteries because that's the non-specific term. We have one more branch off the abdominal aorta, which you can see here. It's a relatively small artery compared to these guys up here and the renal arteries, but this is the inferior mesenteric artery. It's going to supply about half of the large intestine. For some reason, the people who made this model didn't include the inferior mesenteric artery, so I drew it in with a Sharpie. All right, so the abdominal aorta, as it continues inferiorly, is then going to branch into 2. It's going to bifurcate into the common iliac arteries, one on each side, common iliac arteries. Each common iliac artery is then going to further branch into the internal iliac arteries, which travel into the pelvis to supply the urinary bladder and the reproductive system, and the external arteries, which are going to travel out towards the lower extremities. So that's the arteries for the abdominal cavity and into the pelvis. Let's take a look at the veins. So here is the big vein that is bringing blood from the lower part of the body up to the heart. This is called the inferior vena cava. We can see that it's collecting blood from external iliac and internal iliac veins that combine into the common iliac vein and then into the inferior vena cava. You can also see those here, right? External iliac vein. Can't see the internal one very well. All right, and then draining up into the inferior vena cava. We can also see gonadal veins, right, that travel for the most part along with the gonadal arteries. And one of them, the right one, empties into the inferior vena cava here and here. But the left gonadal artery, interestingly, doesn't drain into the inferior vena cava. Instead, it drains into this vein, draining the kidney, so that is the renal vein. So the left gonadal vein drains into the left renal vein, which then drains into the inferior vena cava. And here's the left and right renal veins on this model, and again, that left gonadal vein draining into the left renal vein. Here's a separate diagram, which can be useful, or separate model, excuse me. So again, here are 2 renal veins. This is the right gonadal vein. Here is the left gonadal vein draining into that left renal vein. All right, so you might be wondering then, well, what about the inferior mesenteric vein and the superior mesenteric vein, right? Don't the veins from the intestines need to drain into the inferior vena cava? And the truth is that they do, But because those veins have blood that has absorbed all of the nutrients as well as potential toxins in the food that we have eaten, that blood actually needs to be processed before it can be dumped into the inferior vena cava. So I'm going to put these intestines in place here. And what we can see is the rest of that inferior mesenteric artery and superior mesenteric artery. And so now you can see the superior mesenteric vein and the inferior mesenteric vein. Let's look at it on this one as well. So we have a superior mesenteric vein and an inferior mesenteric vein, but they are not going to drain into the inferior vena cava. In fact, they're going to come together to form a different vein called the hepatic portal vein. Hepatic because it's going to the liver. Portal because it's an unusual type of circulation. So now I'm going to show you a liver model to show you where that hepatic portal vein goes. So the hepatic portal vein receives blood from the splenic vein, the superior mesenteric vein, and the inferior mesenteric vein, and then brings that blood out into the tissue of the liver. The liver is then going to process that blood, get the nutrients and the toxins all sorted, and then the blood is going to move into the hepatic veins. Notice I'm not saying portal now. And then ultimately those hepatic veins are going to drain into the inferior vena cava. So blood from the intestines drains through the hepatic portal system. We have another model where you can see this. So this right here is representing spleen, pancreas, and duodenum. And so we can see here is our celiac trunk with the left gastric, splenic artery, and common hepatic artery. If we look on the posterior aspect, we can see here's our splenic vein. This is our inferior mesenteric vein. This is our superior mesenteric vein, all coming together into that hepatic portal vein. So that's it for the blood vessels of the abdomen and pelvis.